They called me gutter trash and tossed me out into the freezing rain like a piece of fucking garbage. It was my own husband's family gala, and his mother, the queen bitch herself, actually spat on the pristine marble floor near my ruined shoes as the oak doors slammed shut, sealing me in a world of violent wind and icy water. She was laughing. I could hear her shrill, victorious cackle even through the thick wood and the roaring storm. But they had no idea who I was. They had no fucking clue who they had just crossed. Before I peel back the layers of this fucked up fairy tale and show you exactly how the high and mighty Ashworth family learned the most brutal lesson of their lives, do me a favor. Obliterate that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single second of the fallout. Trust me, the look on their faces when they realize who my daddy is, it's a moment you're going to want to replay. Now, let's go back to that night from hell. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air change? Not just silence, but a sudden heavy pressure, like the oxygen has been sucked out and replaced with pure judgment. That's been my entire existence for the last 3 years, ever since I made the catastrophic mistake of marrying Julian Ashworth. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing in my life of being treated as less than, could have prepared me for the public execution that was his mother's 60th birthday party. Let me start from the beginning, because by the time I'm done, you're going to understand why you should never ever assume you know who you're dealing with. My name is Alara. I'm 26 years old, and my life story isn't one of debutante balls and trust funds. I was a ghost in the system, a name on a file passed from one foster home to another. I never knew my parents, never had a single blood relative to call my own. My childhood was a masterclass in learning how to be invisible, how to not take up space, how to not want for anything because wanting only led to disappointment. When I met Julian 4 years ago in a dusty little bookstore downtown, I thought the universe was finally throwing me a bone. He was handsome, charismatic, an architect with a brilliant future. Most importantly, he saw me. For the first time in my life, I felt visible. He made me feel like I mattered. But Julian didn't come alone. He came with the Ashworths. The name itself felt heavy, ancient. They were old money, the kind of wealth that's woven into the very fabric of the city. Their mansion in the exclusive estates at Crestwood Manor wasn't just a house. It was a fortress of legacy and lineage, and I was the barbarian at the gates. From day one, his mother, Beatrice, made it chillingly clear I was a contamination. To my face, she'd offer a smile as thin and sharp as a razor blade. Then, the moment I turned away, I'd hear the whispers to her coven of socialite friends, whispers about my unfortunate background, my lack of pedigree, how Julian was clearly going through some kind of rebellious charity phase. The night of the gala, I waged a one-woman war against their prejudice. I spent 3 hours turning myself into a person I thought they could accept. I'd saved for 6 months, working overtime as a paralegal to buy a single, elegant midnight blue gown. It cost more than my rent, but I saw it as an investment in my own acceptance. I had my hair styled in a sophisticated chignon, splurged on heels that made my feet ache just looking at them. I wanted, with a desperation that now makes my stomach turn, to prove to them that I wasn't the dirt they saw me as. Julian picked me up in his polished silver Mercedes, and I remember the flicker of hope in my chest. He told me I looked breathtaking. I thought, maybe tonight will be different. Maybe tonight, they'll finally see me, not my file. God, I was a fool. The Ashworth estate was a spectacle of obscene wealth, lit up against the stormy sky like a palace from a dark fantasy. Valets in crisp uniforms whisked cars away. Waitstaff floated through the crowds with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate hors d'oeuvres. It was a world constructed from crystal and condescension. The second we stepped through the massive, cathedral-like front doors, I felt it, the weight, the immediate cessation of laughter in our vicinity, the cold, calculating stares that raked over me, assessing my dress, my jewelry, my very right to breathe their rarefied air. Beatrice descended upon us like a vulture in couture. She enveloped Julian in a suffocating hug, murmuring about how she'd missed her darling boy. Then her eyes fell on me. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. She looked at me like I was a roach scuttling across her Persian rug. "Ilara," she said, and my name dripped from her tongue like venom. "How quaint that you could make it." The insult was so perfectly delivered, it was almost an art form. "I do hope you'll be comfortable. This crowd might be a bit sophisticated for someone with your history." Julian squeezed my hand, a gesture that was supposed to be reassuring, and whispered, "You look beautiful. Don't listen to her." But I could already feel him receding, shrinking back into the role of the dutiful son. That was the tragic truth about my husband, a truth I had willfully ignored for 3 years. He was a lion when it was just the two of us, but the moment his family was present, he became a mouse, terrified of his mother's shadow. The party was a blur of passive aggression and social torture. It was exactly what you'd expect from rich people whose only hobby is reminding everyone else how rich they are. There were towering ice sculptures, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, and food that looked more like modern art than something you could actually eat. I tried. I really did. I attempted to engage in conversation, but every interaction was a minefield. They'd ask about my alma mater, and when I mentioned a state university instead of an Ivy League, their smiles would tighten and freeze. They'd ask about my family, where we summered. When I'd say I grew up in foster care, they'd get a sudden, urgent look in their eye and remember they desperately needed to find the bar. But I endured it. I smiled until my jaw ached. I nodded at their vacuous stories about yachting in Monaco. I laughed at their jokes, which were never, ever funny. I was on a mission to prove my worthiness, even if the effort felt like it was grinding my soul into dust. Then came the moment the world ended. I was standing near the dessert table, trying to become one with the wallpaper, when one of Beatrice's close friends, a woman with a face pulled so tight she looked perpetually surprised, stumbled directly into me. It felt intentional. Hard. A full glass of blood-red Cabernet, clutched in my hand for social armor, went airborne. It was like a slow-motion horror film. The wine arced through the air and splashed in a perfect Jackson Pollock-esque splatter all over the front of Beatrice's pristine, custom-made white silk gown. The entire mansion went dead silent. The string quartet faltered. Every single conversation, every whisper, every laugh stopped. 100 pairs of eyes swiveled to stare at the tableau. Me, the stain, and the Empress. "Oh my God," I stammered, my hands shaking as I grabbed for cocktail napkins. "Beatrice, I am so sorry. Let me help you." She recoiled, as if I'd tried to hand her a live serpent. "Don't you dare touch me!" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. Then, loud enough for the entire ground floor to hear, she projected, "I should have known better. This is exactly what happens when you let the gutter into your home. You can take the girl out of the trash, but you can't take the trash out of the girl." The humiliation was a physical force. It was a white-hot fire that consumed my lungs and scorched my heart. My eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for Julian. I was pleading with him, begging him with a look to say something, do something, to be my husband. But he just stood there, a statue of cowardice, his gaze fixed on a point on the floor. His own mother had just branded me as trash in front of everyone he'd ever known. And he did nothing. But Beatrice wasn't finished. Oh no. This was her grand finale. She stepped up onto the small dais where the musicians had been playing, tapping a glass for attention she already commanded. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice echoing with theatrical sorrow, "I believe it's time we address the situation." She paused, and her cold, reptilian eyes found mine across the room. Some people simply do not belong in civilized society. They are agents of chaos. They latch onto good families and bring nothing but embarrassment and shame. I will not have the Ashworth name, my family's legacy, tarnished by this. This. She called me this. I wasn't even a person anymore. I was a thing, a stain. I could feel the collective judgment of the room pressing down on me, suffocating me. And the worst part? They were enjoying it. This was their entertainment for the evening. My utter degradation was a fun little story they'd be dining out on for weeks. "Mother, please," Julian finally managed to squeak out, his voice pathetic and weak. "Can we not do this here?" "No, Julian," Beatrice snapped, her authority absolute. "I have been not doing this here for 3 years, hoping you would come to your senses. But you are clearly blinded. This girl is not one of us. She never will be, and I refuse to participate in this charade for one more second." She turned her full, venomous attention back to me. Her face was a mask of pure contempt. "I want you out of my house, now, and don't even think about coming back." I couldn't breathe. The room was tilting, the crystal chandeliers blurring into streaks of light. All I could hear was the roar of blood in my ears. "Julian," I whispered, my voice cracking. I looked at my husband one last time, a final, desperate appeal to the man I thought I had married. He looked at his mother, then back at me, his eyes full of a miserable conflict he was too weak to resolve. And I saw him make his choice. "Maybe it's for the best if you just go home, Ilara," he said, avoiding my eyes. "We can talk about this tomorrow. My husband, the man who had vowed in front of God and everyone to love and protect me, to forsake all others, was choosing his mommy. He was throwing me away, discarding me like an old coat because he was told to. Something inside me didn't just break. It died. It turned to ash. My hope, my belief that I could ever earn a place in this world. My love for him." "Fine," I said, the word a shard of glass in my throat. "I'll go." But that wasn't enough for Beatrice. She wanted to grind the knife in deeper, to make sure every last drop of my dignity was spilled on her marble floor. "Security," she called out, her voice sharp and imperious. "Please escort this person off the property, and make sure she doesn't take anything that doesn't belong to her." Security. She was calling security on me in my own husband's home, as if I were a common thief. 2 hulking men in black suits materialized from the shadows, their faces impassive. They flanked me, their presence a profound public statement of my disgrace. The entire room was silent, watching the spectacle. The only sound was the click-clack of my heels on the floor as they marched me toward the door, a prisoner on her own wedding day. Just before we reached the exit, Beatrice's voice cut through the air one last time. "Some people need to be taught their place in this world, and hers is most certainly not here." Then I was on the other side of the door. It slammed shut with a sound of utter finality, like a coffin lid closing. And that's when I realized it was storming, not just raining. A full-blown tempest was raging. Lightning tore across the black sky, followed by deafening cracks of thunder. The rain was a solid, freezing sheet, so dense I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. There I was, standing on the circular driveway of a multi-million-dollar estate, in my once beautiful, now soaked designer dress and ruined shoes. My phone, I realized with a fresh wave of despair, had only 5% battery, and I didn't have a dime on me for a cab. Julian had driven me here. I had no car, no way home. I was completely and utterly stranded at the top of a hill in the middle of a thunderstorm, while a house full of the city's elite were inside, undoubtedly toasting to my expulsion. I started to walk. There was nothing else to do. I trudged down their impossibly long, winding driveway toward the main road, the rain plastering my hair to my skull and my dress clinging to me like a second, icy skin. Sobs racked my body, mingling with the shivers that shook me to my core. The cold was brutal. The rain felt like 1,000 tiny needles against my flesh, but it was nothing compared to the agony in my chest. The pain wasn't just heartbreak. It was the chilling, terrifying realization that I was completely, fundamentally alone again, just like that little girl who never unpacked her suitcase, waiting for the next foster home. I thought I had finally found a family. I thought I had found a home in Julian. It was all a lie. I was right back where I started, a nobody from nowhere, belonging to no one. I was maybe halfway down the driveway, a ghost drowning in the storm, when a pair of brilliant headlights sliced through the downpour. My first thought, a pathetic spark of hope, was that it was Julian, that he'd defied his mother and come for me. But as the vehicle drew closer, its shape was all wrong. It wasn't a sleek German sedan. It was massive, black, and silent. A long, impossibly elegant limousine that seemed to absorb the light around it. It glided to a stop directly beside me. The heavily tinted rear window slid down with a faint whir. A man's face was revealed in the soft interior light, and the sight of it made me gasp, the sound swallowed by the storm. It was like looking at a ghost, or a mirror, the same dark, intense eyes, the same high cheekbones, the same strong jawline. It was my face, but older, weathered by time and etched with a deep, profound sorrow. "Elara," he said, his voice a low, urgent baritone that cut through the noise of the storm. "Elara Vance." Vance was my original last name, the name on my birth certificate, the one I'd carried through the foster system before I'd foolishly, eagerly shed it for Ashworth. No one had called me that in years. Who are you?" I stammered, taking an involuntary step back into the deluge. The man didn't answer. Instead, the door opened and he stepped out of the car, into the heart of the storm, completely unconcerned by the rain that immediately began to drench his impeccably tailored, obviously expensive suit. He was tall, powerful, and carried an aura of authority that was unlike anything I had ever encountered. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were swimming with unshed tears. "My name is Silas Blackwood," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "And I have been looking for you for 26 years." The ground seemed to fall away beneath me. Blackwood. Not Vance. But the timing, the face, it couldn't be. I don't understand," I whispered, the words barely audible. "You are my daughter," he said, taking a careful step closer, as if approaching a frightened animal. "My baby girl, I've been searching for you every single day since you were taken from me." The world stopped. The rain, the thunder, the cold, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. This had to be a dream, a hallucination brought on by hypothermia and grief. My father. The mythical figure I'd spent my childhood fantasizing about. The hero who would one day swoop in and rescue me. The man I had finally given up on ever finding. "That's impossible," I choked out, shaking my head in denial. "I was abandoned at a hospital. My parents didn't want me. That's what they told me." "No," Silas said, his voice firm, cutting through my disbelief. That is a lie the system told you to make their paperwork easier. That is not what happened. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a phone, protected by a waterproof case. He swiped through it and held it out to me. On the screen was a photograph of a beautiful young woman with my exact smile, holding a tiny, swaddled baby. The baby had my eyes. This was your mother, Serafina. She was the love of my life. She was killed in a hit-and-run accident when you were just 6 months old. I was deployed overseas with the Special Forces. By the time I was notified and got back to the United States, you were gone. Swallowed by the system. Because we weren't married, they told me I had no paternal rights. They told me to move on. He looked up from the phone, his eyes burning with 2 decades of fury. I never did. I have spent a fortune, hired every investigator, pulled every string for 26 years, trying to find my daughter. I stared at the picture of my mother, my heart fracturing and reforming into something new. Why now? How did you find me tonight? My lead investigator finally got a positive ID on you 3 months ago. You were married, living a quiet life. I've been watching from a distance, trying to find the right way, the right moment, to approach you without destroying your world. Tonight, I was finally working up the courage to come to your home, to knock on your door. Then I got a call from my security detail, who was parked down the street. He said he saw a young woman who matched your description being thrown out of the Ashworth mansion into a storm. He paused, his gaze sweeping over my shivering, pathetic state. Someone at that party saw what happened. They saw you being cast out, and they felt it was wrong enough to make a call to a reporter friend of theirs who owed me a favor. Fate, it seems, finally decided to intervene. I couldn't process it all. This stranger, this powerful man who wore my face, was my father. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been fighting for me. He had shown up tonight not by accident, but by design. At the precise moment my entire world had crumbled to dust. What would you even do? How could you process a reality-shattering truth like that in a single night? Let me know your thoughts down below. And while you're there, if you're enjoying this roller coaster, make sure you've hit that like button. I know this is overwhelming, he said softly. I know you have every reason to distrust me, but please, Ilara, let me get you out of this rain. Let me tell you everything. Let me show you who you truly are. Behind him, the lights of the Ashworth mansion glowed like malevolent eyes. Inside that house were the people who had just dissected me for sport, who saw me as worthless. And standing in front of me was a man who saw me as the purpose of his entire life. Who are you really? I asked, my voice trembling. What do you do? A faint smile touched Silas's lips, the first I'd seen. It was my smile. After I left the military, I built a global logistics and private security firm from the ground up. Blackwood Holdings. I had heard of it. Everyone had. Blackwood Holdings wasn't just a company. It was a global power player, a private empire with interests in shipping, technology, and security consulting for entire nations, which meant the man standing before me, my father, was a billionaire. Not a millionaire like the Ashworths. A billionaire, many times over. The savage, brutal irony of it all hit me like a physical blow. Beatrice Ashworth had just thrown me out of her house for being a poor, pedigreeless nobody. She had called me gutter trash. And I was, in fact, the sole heir to a fortune that could buy and sell the entire Ashworth clan, their home, their legacy, and their social standing without even noticing the expense. I looked back at the glowing mansion one last time, a monument to their ignorance. Then I looked at the man who was my father. Even if it was a lie, even if it was the most elaborate scam in history, it was better than dying in this storm. I got in the limousine. The interior was another world. Sumptuous leather seats, a fully stocked bar, gleaming wood paneling, and the blessed, beautiful silence of absolute soundproofing. It was warm and dry. Silas sat across from me and wrapped a thick cashmere blanket around my shoulders. "Tell me about her," I said, my voice hoarse. "Tell me about my mother." For the next hour, as the limo drove through the storm-lashed city, Silas Blackwood gave me back my past. He told me about Serafina, how they met, how she was a fiery artist who painted the world in colors only she could see. He showed me more photos, videos. I watched my mother laugh, dance, and argue passionately about politics. I saw myself in the way she moved her hands when she talked, in the fire in her eyes. He told me about the night I was born, the happiest night of his life. He told me about the accident, the bureaucratic walls he faced, the endless, soul-crushing years of searching, of dead ends, of almost giving up but never quite managing to. "I never stopped," he said, his voice raw. "Not for one day. I built this entire empire, Ilara, on the hope that one day it would be powerful enough to find you. That one day, I could give it all to you." By the time the limousine pulled into a private underground garage, I was crying again. But these were not the tears of humiliation and despair I had shed in the rain. These were tears of release, of discovery, of finally, after 26 years, knowing where I came from. We rode a private elevator up in silence, and the doors opened directly into a breathtaking penthouse that overlooked the entire city. The storm was still raging outside, but from here it looked like art. "This is my home," Silas said. "Our home, if you'll have it. There is a life here for you, a legacy that has been waiting." He paused, then looked at me. "But first, I saw the look in your eyes back there. There's something you need to do, isn't there?" A cold, hard resolve was solidifying in my chest, replacing the grief. "Yes," I said, my voice steady for the first time all night. "We need to go back to the party." Silas looked surprised, then a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Why would you ever want to set foot in that place again?" "Because," I said, meeting his gaze, feeling a strength I never knew I possessed. "They need to learn exactly who it is they just tried to destroy." His smile widened. "Now you sound like my daughter." 20 minutes later, the limousine was once again gliding up the long, winding driveway of the Ashworth estate. But this time, we were not alone. We were a motorcade. 2 black SUVs, filled with men in dark suits who were clearly not party guests, followed us. These were Silas's personal security. Another sedan followed them, carrying a team of what were unmistakably high-powered corporate lawyers. The party was still in full swing. Through the massive windows, we could see them, dancing and drinking, the memory of my humiliation already fading into a piece of tawdry gossip. Beatrice had probably spun it as a triumphant victory for good breeding. Silas stepped out of the limo first. My father, in his now dry, impossibly expensive suit, radiated an aura of pure, unadulterated power. This wasn't arrogance. This was command. I stepped out behind him. I was still in my ruined, stained dress, my hair a mess, but I no longer felt weak. I felt like a queen arriving to pass judgment. We didn't knock. One of Silas's men simply opened the front door, and we walked in. The music stuttered and died. A wave of silence rolled through the grand ballroom as every head turned toward the entrance. A servant rushed forward, then stopped dead, intimidated by the wall of grim-faced men behind us. Beatrice appeared a moment later, her face a mask of annoyance at the interruption. "I'm sorry. This is a private event," she began, her voice dripping with disdain. Then she saw me. her face twisted into a snarl of disbelief and rage. "I told you that you are not welcome here. Get out!" "Mrs. Ashworth," Silas said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a shard of ice, carrying an authority that made Beatrice flinch. "My name is Silas Blackwood. I believe you are acquainted with my daughter." Beatrice looked from him to me, confused. "Your daughter? I don't know what kind of pathetic scam you people are trying to pull, but I have already had this piece of trash removed from my home once tonight." "My daughter?" Silas repeated, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder, colder. "Elara Blackwood, the woman you just publicly humiliated and threw out into a hurricane." Behind Beatrice, the crowd was whispering. I saw Julian pushing his way forward, his face ashen as he saw me standing there next to this formidable man. I heard someone near Beatrice whisper his name, a panicked, urgent hiss. "Beatrice, that's Silas Blackwood, from Blackwood Holdings." I watched the blood drain from Beatrice Ashworth's face. The dawning comprehension, the sheer pant-shitting terror in her eyes was more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. Her jaw went slack. Her carefully constructed mask of superiority shattered into a million pieces. "You threw my daughter out of your house," Silas continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea. "You called her worthless, gutter trash. You had her escorted out by security like a criminal. And you did all of this to the sole heir of a man who could buy your pathetic little company, tear down this ridiculous house for sport, and salt the earth where it stood, all without affecting my quarterly earnings." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of social and financial oblivion. Every guest was now staring at Beatrice and Julian, not with sympathy, but with the dawning horror that they were standing next to social lepers. I didn't know," Beatrice stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. She never said what?" Silas roared, his voice now a thunderclap that made people jump. "That her father was wealthy? Does a person's net worth determine whether or not they deserve basic human decency from you? Is that how you measure a soul, Mrs. Ashworth? By the number of zeros in their bank account?" Julian finally found his voice, stumbling forward. "Mr. Blackwood, sir. I'm Julian Ashworth. I'm Elara's husband. I had no idea— if I had known who she was." Silas turned his head slowly to look at my husband. The look of pure, undiluted contempt in my father's eyes was enough to make Julian physically recoil. "You had no idea what, son? That your wife deserved your protection? That she deserved to have her husband stand up for her when his own mother was tearing her to shreds? You stood by and watched. And you're telling me that the only thing that would have changed your mind is money? You're not a man. You're an accessory." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "Elara," Beatrice pleaded, her voice shaking as she took a desperate step toward me. "Please. This is all a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. If I had just known—" But I wasn't listening to her lies anymore. I had spent 3 years desperately clawing for an ounce of their respect. Now, drowning in it, I realized I had never needed it at all. "The funny thing is, Beatrice," I said, my own voice calm and clear, ringing through the silent room. "I would have loved you. For free. If you had just shown me an ounce of kindness, a shred of human decency, I would have been the most loyal, loving daughter-in-law you could have ever asked for. The money wouldn't have mattered, but you couldn't do it. You had to show me how ugly you really are." I turned my eyes to Julian, the man whose weakness had cost us everything. "And you let this happen. You chose them. You chose their money and their name over your wife. We're done." Silas placed a protective hand on my shoulder. "Let's go, Elara. You owe these people nothing. Isham." As we turned to leave, One of the lawyers stepped forward, holding a briefcase. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth," he said, his voice crisp and formal. "On behalf of my client, Miss Elara Blackwood, you can expect to be served with a lawsuit for public defamation, slander, and intentional infliction of emotional distress by mourning. We will be seeking damages in the 8-figure range. All communications from this point forward should be directed to my office." Beverly let out a strangled cry. "Please, Elara, we can fix this! Your family! Julian loves you!" I paused at the door and looked back at the ruins of her party, at the terrified faces of people who had, an hour ago, considered me less than human. "Family doesn't throw each other out in a storm, Beatrice," I said, "and love doesn't stand by silently and watch." Then I walked out of that house and never, ever looked back. 6 months have passed. I live in the penthouse now. My father didn't just buy it for me. He had it legally put in my name. I work at Blackwood Holdings, not in some token position, but heading a new philanthropic division we created together, one dedicated to reforming the foster care system and providing resources for kids who, like me, were forgotten. We spend hours every week just talking, piecing together a lifetime of lost moments. I finally have a family. A real one. The Ashworths have tried to contact me. Dozens of times. Beatrice sent lavish gifts and rambling handwritten letters of apology. Julian has called, texted, emailed, and even had the audacity to show up at my office building begging for a second chance. I've blocked them on every platform. I filed for divorce the day after the party. I heard through the grapevine that the lawsuit and the public scandal have ruined them. Their company stock plummeted, and their social circle abandoned them overnight. Last I heard, a subsidiary of Blackwood Holdings was preparing a hostile takeover bid. But their downfall isn't my victory. My victory is the woman I see in the mirror now. I'm not the scared, invisible girl trying to earn her place anymore. I'm Elara Blackwood. I found my past, and in doing so, I built my own future. I learned the hardest lesson of all that night. Your worth is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. Sometimes, the people who try to bury you don't realize that you're a seed. If my story has touched you, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what is the most important lesson you've learned about self-worth? Subscribe for more stories that prove the world is full of surprises. And always remember, treat every single person you meet with respect. You have no idea who they really are or who they are about to become. I'll see you in the next one.